Mana System, Hello, World. By M.J. Markgrove. Chapter 91, Shifting Gears. I kicked the criminal in the face, knocking his teeth out and forcing him to the ground. We had been in Texas for a month now. At first, I was surprised by how many people had survived around the area once known as Houston. That was until I realized they had more guns than any other state. It helped them survive the first few months with ease. When we arrived, we found that the local law enforcement had all combined into one group. I wasn't surprised, considering how many people had died during the first few weeks. Even Texas wasn't spared that reality. I learned that while the law enforcement was coming together, other groups took the chaos to form their own little kingdoms. This didn't surprise me. Power fills a vacuum. It actually worked out in our favor. With the peacekeepers busy, they needed to contract out jobs. Hence the reason I was kicking a guy in the ribs right now. He groaned in pain. Suck it up, I gave you the opportunity to surrender, but you decided shooting at me was a better option. Now I have 2 holes in my armor and am in bad mood. I fingered the 2 holes in the left side of my armor. The bullets had penetrated my armor and tore into my skin, but the damage was minimal. These were some of the weaker outlaws in the area. They hadn't been smart enough to choose a class to complement their guns, or a decent class at all. This wasn't true of some of the more successful gangs out there, but we hadn't dealt with any of them. Time to go, I said, hefting the dazed man to his feet. You guys ready to turn these idiots in? Yeah, Martin said as he cinched the last knot on his prisoner. Ska just nodded. His prisoner was bleeding heavily and unconscious. Well, 3 survivors are more than I thought we would get. It is an admirable number considering how weak these men were, Ska said in disdain. I had to agree. Out of the 10 men, these 3 were the only ones to survive our initial attack. We dragged the 3 survivors back to the jail, where they would be tried, and likely executed for their crimes. That was fine with me. I collected our reward and we left. So what are you guys' plans for today? I plan on going back to the dungeon, Martin stated. Well, at least it's still worth the effort for some of us. Going alone this time? Yeah, I can solo them with my summons now, plus Ska said he wanted to do something else. Oh, yeah. Yes, I wish to hunt some of the monsters near the city, Ska replied with a deep purr. Alright, you 2 have fun. I'm going to work on the project. The 3 of us went our separate ways. Martin was heading to one of the 3 dungeons we found. We had used them as a cash cow. Unfortunately, after 5 trips the dungeons stopped paying out. Since they were only level 10 dungeons, I got little in the way of experience. So after it stopped paying out, I stopped going. Ska continued to go with Martin for a time. Seems like even he got bored with the weak creatures. I headed toward the outskirts of town, grumbling at the damage to my temporary armor. It was hard enough to replace my staff and armor. None of it was the same quality as my old gear, but it was all that we could afford. I reinforced them with runes, after I purchased a new carving kit. A quick burst of anger flitted through my mind as I recalled why I had to replace my gear. I certainly haven't forgotten why we were here. I arrived at a rocky hill. From the outside, it matched the sparse vegetation of the surroundings. As I made my way to the backside, there was a hole bored into it. I had spotted this hill after our second mission for the local law enforcement. That was when the idea popped into my mind. After thinking it over and inspecting the hill, I came up with a plan. 3 weeks of hard work later, and here it was. A hill, with a large open cavern inside. True, it wasn't much, but it was a start. The fortress, once complete, would have a domed top and an angled underside. I figured the angled sides would help deflect attacks. Not that those were the only thing we would be relying on. My weeks hadn't only been spent hollowing out the hill. I had figured out runes for shielding and cloaking. Then I had a harsh hit of reality when I calculated how much mithril I would need to make it work. It made the funds I spent on the house look like chump change in comparison. I wasn't working on that today or the house. Without funding, we were at a bit of a standstill. I walked over to the folding table and chair that made up my workspace. The cave was a bit sparse decoration-wise. There was another table, some chairs, and our bedrolls. Maybe if Fiona was around she could have given us some pointers. She was scouring the countryside for dungeons and scouting out the dwarven stronghold. I tried telling her it wasn't necessary, but she felt like it was her fault we got captured, because she wasn't there to protect us. No amount of me telling her otherwise seemed to help. Accessing my new storage ring, I set a tattoo machine on the table, along with a mana generator. Thankfully the town we found ourselves in had a bazaar. The cost was a bit much, considering the materials we needed. But I wasn't about to go back to trying the old school approach. I had made little headway in the last month on the tattoo design to strengthen my body. Mostly due to lack of time and materials. I was just about to get started when I heard a knock. So this is where you run off to? Can't say I'm all that impressed, a man I recognized said, walking through the opening. I really needed a door. Marshall, what brings you by our humble abode? Just came to thank you and your team for their work today. Where are the others? Out and about. They were unimpressed with our target and needed to burn off some more steam. The marshal grunted. Is that really the only reason you came by? No, he said, reaching into his vest and pulling out a cigarette and lighter. You mind? Nope, go right ahead. He nodded in thanks, lighting the homemade cigarette. This came in today, he said, handing me a folded piece of paper. I reached out, taking the sheet from his hand, and unfolded it. My eyes scanned the document while the marshal walked around the room, inspecting the walls. Level 15's hey, you sure this information is accurate? The man nodded. Came from a reliable source. He confirmed at least 3 of their crew were of that level. With a total of 25 others of varying levels. And you want the 3 of us to take them on? I asked in confusion. Not alone. We just need some higher-leveled backup for the 10 officers we're sending. Dead or alive? Dead, they are too dangerous for us to attempt to keep them alive. I can bring it to the others when they get back. When do you need an answer by? A few days. The gang is on foot but we can't wait too long or they will get into the foothills and we will never find them. All right, I'll give you an answer tomorrow. Take care, Paul, and tell your friends I said thanks, he said, before leaving. Well, at least this would make Ska happy, I mumbled. That overgrown kitty had been getting grumpy lately, what with the under-leveled mobs and weak targets. I supposed I could use a change of pace as well. My lack of progress on my tattoos was beginning to bother me. I pulled out the animal corpse and got to work testing some combinations. I was pulled from my work a few hours later when Martin returned. Any luck? He said, taking off his armor and setting in the corner. No, I sighed in resignation. How did your dungeon dive go? I asked, stretching my cramped muscles. Good, I hit level 11. Hey, congratulations. Any sweet new skills? I got one called Blood Sacrifice. Using my blood I can fix my dice to a specific outcome. That will come in handy, I replied. Indeed. Too bad it can only be used once per day. You might want to think about using your free skill point to get a recast skill like my multicast. Is that what you use to cast your skills multiple times? Yup, increases the mana cost each time. As tempting as that sounds. I don't think it would work for me. And I probably wouldn't want to risk it. My skill requires 100 health to cast. Yikes, yeah, probably not a good idea then. Still, it should be helpful. Oh, before I forget, the marshal stopped by, he wanted to thank us for our work today. Well, that was kind of him. But I'm guessing by the look on your face, this wasn't a social call. Not entirely. He came by with a request for assistance. They found a group of outlaws. 3 of which are said to be level 15. Well, that will make Ska happy. How many? 28, but he is going to be bringing 10 of his men. So, 2 to 1 odds seems doable. Any info on what classes those bigwigs are? I shook my head, info is scarce but we should be able to handle it. Alright, I'm in. When is the shindig? We have a few days. It should give me time to fix my stupid armor. Oh how I miss my old armor, I lamented. Don't worry, we'll get our stuff back eventually. Any idea when Ska will be back? I chuckled, he will probably come running through that door as soon as he smells your cooking. Well, then I better get at it, Martin smiled. My estimates of Ska's return time were a bit off. He came in well after dark, scratched and bruised, but happy. I explained to him what the marshal relayed to us and it made Ska even happier. He was purring like a kitten with the news, although, Martin's food may have attributed to that. I also finally talked Ska into enhancing his claws. Hold still, I grumbled for the 5th time. It is uncomfortable, Ska growled. I never said it would be pain-free, only that it would make your claws more deadly. He grumbled but did his best not to move. There wasn't much room on his claws and eventually, they would grow out making the runes useless, so I decided to go with a simple runic combination. I decided on a life-steal combination I had come across. That way he could heal himself while causing additional damage to his target. Originally I wanted to do a different set of runes on each claw, but testing on a dead creature proved that to be a dangerous proposition. I really had to stop having dead creatures blow up on me. Just like weapons and armor, the quality of the body needed to be up to the task of channeling the magic. I figured a sentient creature could take more than a monster, but it wasn't like I had a way to test it. Well, I did, but I wasn't ready to go that route yet. I finished the last claw. Alright, done. Give it a try, I said. He gave me a blank look. Oh right, you should take some damage first, to test it thoroughly, I said. I invited him to a duel and he growled in approval. Let's go outside first. As you wish. We walked to a small clearing and I pulled my staff from my ring, giving it a twirl. It was weird having such a light staff again. My armor appeared on my body with a flash of thought as well. Turns out there were different grades of storage rings or devices in general. It cost me 3 times as much, almost 2500 credits, but I got one that allowed me to quickly equip any gear. I could have gotten a cheaper one, but I wanted the maximum space, which turned out to be 9 cubic feet. Sure, it was an expense we could little afford, but I felt it a must. The ability to equip all my armor in less than a second was a game changer. Whenever you're ready. Ska didn't waste a moment, sprinting at me. I was ready for his leaping attack, spinning to the side and cracking him across the shoulder with my staff. I heard a growl of pain as he landed. He rotated and lashed a clawed arm at me with blinding speed. I wasn't fast enough to avoid the strike as his claws ripped deep bloody lines down my exposed arm. I grinned despite the pain. Ska was learning quickly. When we had fought the first time, he had no concept of fighting an intelligent opponent. He treated me like his normal opponents, wild animals or monsters. That didn't mean I was going to go easy on him. The training Martin and I had put him through helped him learn to survive against crafty opponents. I slapped his other paw away with a crack of my staff as I cast my wings and flew outside his reach. This gave me time to inspect the damage he dealt with his enhanced claws. HP, 665, 732/645. Almost 100 damage from one attack. It was impressive, considering his speed and the fact that he could rake me multiple times in quick succession. How's the healing? Good, I recovered 25 health, he said with a rumble. Now get down here so we can finish this. You asked for it, I said with a smile. Chapter 92, Remnants of the Past. Oh, quit sulking, I said to Ska, you did much better this time. I of course was referring to our test/duel the previous day. I still managed to beat Ska, pretty easily. He had the speed, but not the reach or magic to contend with me. I decided to fix one of those issues overnight. I added runes to his leather straps that would reduce the magical damage he took. Unlike my previous armor, these runes manifested in a field around him. Wouldn't be much point in only having the protection cover the straps. It wasn't as strong as my armor, only reducing the effect of magic by 30%, but it was better than nothing. We were preparing for the raid. I had already spoken to the marshal that morning. He confirmed that they were ready to go when we were. I just needed to do some last-minute repairs to my armor vest. I patched the holes with some leather scrap I had around. It would work for now. I inspected the armor. Rune-crafted metal reinforced leather vest. Quality, average. Armor, 22. Slashing resistance, 45%. Stabbing resistance, 45%. Magic resistance 20%. This metal reinforced leather vest was crafted by an intermediate crafter with common materials. It has been enhanced with runic enchantments. Unlike my previous armor, this was a simple leather vest with large metal plates covering the chest and upper torso. It was the best piece of armor I could afford at the time, and even with my runic enhancements, it wasn't all that good. But it was certainly better than nothing. I also finally got some armored pants, a helmet, and bracers. Like my vest, they were basic things, not even worth the time to carve runes into, but I did anyway. The added effect was barely noticeable. I think I gained 3 armor and another 5% magic resistance. I grunted at that. Even Ska's leather straps were of higher quality. I put everything into my ring and tested putting it on and taking it off a few times, using the ring's power. It was still weird to me that I could do this. I moved and stretched, making sure everything was adjusted properly. The ring could only put items on in the condition that they were entered into the ring. After everything was checked, it went back into the ring. No reason to be uncomfortable unless I had to be. You two ready to go? Yeah, Martin replied, slinging a satchel over his shoulder. He hadn't bothered replacing his storage ring yet. I am ready for a fight, Ska growled. All right, let's head over to meet the Marshal and his friends. We walked over to where Marshal told us to meet them. This made me miss Bella, and I hoped the dwarves had let her out of her cage. If they killed or harmed her, I was going to be pissed. I took a deep breath and pushed those feelings aside so I could concentrate on today. This mission was going to be dangerous enough without any distractions. Paul, Martin, Ska, you made it. Good timing, I was just about to lay out our plan. Marshal, I said, nodding to the other officers. Here's what we know. The group has a camp in a small valley to the north. There is only one way in, a tight trail with traps and barricades. There will be no surprising these folks, the Marshal added. Wait, how did your man get in and out? Martin asked. He wasn't our man, we captured one of the gang members and our truth seeker was able to lift the information from his mind. Martin nodded, motioning for the man to continue. There is also a cave in the valley, believed to be a dungeon, but the man we caught wasn't privy to that information. That could explain the leader's high levels, I stated. The Marshal nodded, that was our take as well. May I make a recommendation? I asked. Sure, the Marshal replied. I have a flight skill, so I could fly over the valley. Also, Ska could probably make his way over as well. The Marshal rubbed his chin. That could work, you two will be on your own until we can break through the valley entrance though. Ska and I can handle it for a few minutes. I had to put my hand on Ska's shoulder to settle the excited Grimalkin. His tail was flicking back and forth quickly, giving away his excitement. After some more details on the layout of the camp and everyone checking their gear, the Marshal spoke up. Everyone ready? There was a round of confirmations as the group headed out. I watched from within the trees, high up on the valley wall. It had taken 2 uses of my wings to get up here. Ska sat quietly beside me as we waited. My eyes scanned the men below, trying to pick out the highest leveled individuals. Those would be our targets. At the moment, locating them was turning out to be a challenge. Nobody stood out from the distance. I checked the watch that I had found in one of the houses we looted along the way. It read 1:47, not that that was accurate. But it gave me an estimate on how long before the attack at the mouth of the valley would begin. A little over 10 minutes, I whispered to Ska. He nodded quietly, moving into position. He would have no trouble scaling the rocky terrain. The inner walls of the valley were not as steep as the outer wall and he managed to make that look easy. There was a flurry of activity below as men grabbed weapons and started running. Looks like the Marshal and his men had been spotted. Shit, we knew that was a possibility but it still sucked. What I didn't expect was for 3 men to bolt into the dungeon. Those had to be our targets. I nodded to Ska and he was off in a flash, running down the hill on all 4s. Not to be outdone, I spread my wings and flew after him. I covered about 40% of the distance from the top of the valley to the dungeon entrance in the time it took my wings to expire. Ska was still ahead of me by quite the distance, so I used Blink Step to catch up with the Grimalkin. We both slowed as we reached the cave entrance. The rest of the enemy had not seen our approach, too busy fending off the others. We could hear the sounds of pitched battle in the distance but I tuned it out. My staff was out and crackling with lightning. I couldn't afford to imbue any other element into the sub-PAR material. The mouth of the cave was empty as we stepped inside. A message popped up alerting us that it was a dungeon. Not that we already didn't know that. The fact that it was only level 12 surprised me though. These guys must have been farming this thing for months. I didn't like the fact that the enemy knew every inch of the dungeon and we had no idea what was inside. Even the name wasn't helpful. You have entered Califran's Divide, level 12 dungeon. Recommended team size, 3 people of level 14 or higher, good luck. The fact that the inside looked man-made, spoke of traps. We could wait for the rest of the backup, but I was bored, and now I was angry. Keep an eye out for traps, I said quietly. Ska nodded, sniffing the air. They split up, he growled. Of course, they did, I groaned internally. The room had 3 tunnels leading off of it. The dark marble, soaking up the flickering torchlight. Ska pointed to one tunnel. 2 went that way. The last went down there. We can't let them get behind us. You go after the solo feller. He growled in approval, sprinting off. I only had time to suck in my breath as two blades swept down from the ceiling in the doorway he entered. A diving corkscrew allowed him to escape the trap with only a few lost hairs. Reckless idiot. I didn't want to see Ska die, I had grown fond of the Grimalkin. That being said, I wasn't going to control him either. He should be relatively safe with all my buffs on, as well as second chance. I turned toward the other path, tossing a pebble through the doorway. A set of nasty-looking spikes shot out from the wall. As they retracted to reset, I walked through the opening, tossing stones ahead of me as I went. The tunnel turned into a massive open room, with grand arches and a ceiling that was well over 100 feet up. There were plenty of places to hide within this room. The fact that I saw no monsters told me that either the dungeon had not reset yet, or the two cleared out the room before I arrived. As I looked around, I kept catching and tossing the stone in my hand. My perception was high enough to pick out the pressure plates on the floor, but I had no idea what they would activate. I tossed one of the pebbles I was juggling, activating one of the plates 30 or so feet away. There was an audible click, followed by a torrent of fire from two of the pillars near the trap. As the fire ended, I heard a soft scraping of a boot against stone. Gotcha, I thought. I quickly and silently hid behind another pillar. A few minutes later, two men walked out. Fucking trap vaporized him, one of the men said. No, there should be something left, the other replied. I heard the sound of a sword coming free. I rolled my eyes, these guys weren't the brightest. He's hiding, seems like he's afraid of us, the second man said. Told you we should have jumped him. Why don't you come out and play, the first one, an arguable the dimmer of the two said. I already had an idea for how to even the odds in this fight, but first I needed to know what I was dealing with. I stepped out from behind the column. Howdy, fellas, don't suppose I can convince you to come quietly. The dark arrow that left a burning line across my cheek seemed to indicate that was a no. I could feel a creeping sensation coming from the cut, but a quick cleanse got rid of the effect. I used Identify before the archer loaded another arrow. Bartleby Dread Archer level 15. Thomas Kincaid Fire Dancer level 15. I had to pause for a second. My Identify shouldn't be showing me last names unless I had met the person before. I examined the man's face more closely, my eyes going wide as I pointed my staff at him. You! I hissed. The name I had forgotten, but the face. I wouldn't soon forget the face of one of Charla's goons. The man seemed to come to the same realization as I did. He rushed at me, but not before Shroud plunged the entire room into foggy darkness. I had to deflect another arrow from the archer before I activated my tattoo. The fog became transparent, letting me see the two men. The archer seemed to have some ability to pierce my spell as he fired another arrow my way. I dodged it, but instead of closing on him, I tossed an entire handful of pebbles at him. The man was oblivious to the pebbles as he knocked another arrow. One bounced off his armor, causing him to look down. He didn't have time to dodge as 12 jets of fire spewed out from the columns. Two had been aimed near enough to him to set his clothing on fire. The man screamed as he tried to put out the flames, only making it worse when he triggered another trap. But I had other things to worry about. The fire dancer redirected one of the flames, right at me. I was forced to dodge behind a pillar. My arm was scorched badly despite my elemental defense being on. I choked down a scream and cast Rejuvenate, noticing the fire had taken a sizable chunk out of my health. So either he could see through the magical fog as well, or just knew where to aim. I ran behind another pillar, hearing something whistle past my head. The sound of metal rebounding off stone gave me my answer and got me moving again. This time I was forced to activate Area of Denial as the traps behind me spewed fire. I needed this man alive, but he wasn't going to make it easy. I needed to know if he was down here because of the black dragons. 3 more throwing daggers came at me and I knocked them aside, not wanting the man to know my shield was up. I recalled he had seen me fight in the slave arena and was hoping he had forgotten some of my moves. I saw the fire dancer pull out a lighter and got a bad feeling. As soon as the spark lit, the man began flowing into an intricate series of moves. The fire growing with each passing motion. I activated Blink Step, not caring if I activated traps, I needed to subdue him quickly. The entire room became bright as more and more traps activated. In hindsight, that had been a mistake on my part. I saw the man smile as he pulled those flames towards him as well. What came next would have made a dragon proud. The billowing mass of flame shot out from the tip of the man's sword and flowed toward me like a deadly tide. I still wasn't within range as the head of the wave slammed into my barrier. The heat caused the stones below me to melt as I was pushed back by the pressure of the attack. I had hoped the man had forgotten about my skill, but seems he had a good memory. Unfortunately, I had never got to see the man fight. I used disruption to stem the flow of the attack, long enough for me to activate my wings. With a leap, I took to the air. The fire curved back around, following me like a living thing. I watched the man flick his sword in my direction, the fire obeying his will. I needed to end this fight before my shield died. I decided to take away his advantage, activating Eye of the Storm. Rain and lightning pelted down, smothering the fire, and I finally managed to hit the man. He jumped back, nursing the arm that had been struck by my lightning. I rushed down, flapping the wings as fast as possible. The man frantically tried lighting his now drenched lighter. When that didn't work, he scanned around for a pressure plate. He was only a few feet away from one, but I got there before he could act, slamming my staff into his hastily blocking sword. Too bad swords are metal and metal conducts electricity. The man screamed as the shock tore through his body. Contrary to popular belief, electricity doesn't make you immediately drop something. Nope, it locks your muscles up good and tight. The man tried to drop his sword as I pressed my staff into it. I kept my staff in contact with his sword, following him to the ground. After about 20 seconds the man went limp. He was unconscious but not dead. I checked on the other man, but he was a blackened stump. I cursed, realizing I didn't get the kill notice for him. I took the fire dancer's weapons and lighter, dragging him back out of the room. I needed answers, and I wasn't about to do it in the room he had the most advantage in. The only safe room was the entrance cavern, so I had to drag him there. To be honest, the fight left me a bit disappointed. I expected more from one of Sharla's hand-picked minions. Sure, they were both strong fighters, but even with a room that gave one of them all the advantage, they weren't able to capitalize on it. True, I had almost 10 levels worth of ability points on them, not to mention all of the extra skills I had collected. But if they had worked together properly, they could have kept me from closing until my shield wore off. Chapter 93, Time for Answers. As I dragged the unconscious and bound man into the entry hall, I spotted Ska. He was covered in blood and sported more than a few small cuts. "You okay?" "I am fine, the fight was exhilarating," he replied, testing the word. Martin had been teaching him new words again, I noticed. "Who is that?" he asked, pointing toward my package. "Someone that needs to answer some questions. Can you go see if the others need help? If they don't, tell Martin to come here, but keep everyone else away." Ska nodded and lopped away. I probably should have washed the blood off of him before I sent him off. Oh well. I roughly tossed the man against the wall, eliciting a groan. "Wake up, sunshine," I said, kicking him in the hip. The man opened his swollen eyes and glared at me. "Try anything and I'll juice you again." To make my point, I pointed the crackling staff at his sensitive bits. "Why are you here?" "Fuck you, slave," the man said, spitting a glob of blood in my direction. "Wrong answer," I said flatly, jabbing my staff into his groin. I held it there while he screamed. I made sure to heal his injury, wouldn't want him to die, before I got my answers. After 30 seconds I pulled my staff away. "We're just here to level, please, stop," the man cried out, trying to slump over and cover his groin. I pushed him upright with my foot. "None of that now. Did Sharla send you down here?" "And no, we defected when we found out she was dead. Her father has a temper and wouldn't hesitate to hunt her followers down for their inability to protect her. Even if you weren't there. Wouldn't matter to him," the man groaned. I laughed. "Her father and Obadiah are dead," I said. "Obadiah? The master's slave, who would care if he was dead?" I raised an eyebrow. I guess this man didn't know everything. "Tell me what you know of her family." Turns out the man knew quite a bit about the Cotton family tree. At least on her father's side. I learned about the older brother of Harold. One that was far more violent, if that could be believed. According to Thomas the fire dancer, the brother was in New York during those events. Thomas was stationed at a remote Black Dragon outpost during the insurrection. After which he fled the area, making for the south. I had to think back. That was what, 5-6 months ago if I recalled correctly. The rumors that Michael had returned to Chicago to avenge his family, I admit was a bit of a concern. It took a bit of torture to find out how he learned of this information. Someone with a scrying skill was all I was able to get out of him. The last information I learned caused me to end our discussion. If it was true it would spell trouble, and I hurried to find Martin. According to Thomas, Michael and his cohorts were on the trail of the perpetrator. They were under the impression that Charla was still alive. Normally I wouldn't care. But if they managed to track that stupid ring I tossed into the desert, that would mean they were less than a day from Armin. While I didn't care if Martin's sister died, I would feel like an ass if I didn't tell him and at least try to stop it. I realized that his sister may have been right, I did bring trouble. I found Martin and Ska heading through the bandit camp. I waved them over. "What's up?" Martin asked, winded from the jog over. "Armin may be in danger," I said tersely. What do you mean?" I explained to Martin what the man told me, then about what happened before I came to Armin. He knew some of it, but I left out details in my previous retelling. He reacted as I expected. "What do we?" he asked, pacing back and forth. "Nothing for the moment, until the base is up and running. It's much too dangerous for us to try and take on these men. Especially if they are anywhere near the level that the other leaders were. That could take months." Martin shouted. I blew out a breath. I didn't want to resort to this because people are going to start asking questions, but we can purchase cheap weapons and I can enchant them. Then we just sell them back for a profit. Quick and dirty to get the resources we need. Martin nodded quickly. "Thanks for doing this, Paul." "You don't need to thank me, we're friends, and that's what friends do. Now let's go collect our reward and get to work." I followed Ska and Martin to where the marshal was. Their fight did not go as well as ours. 2 of his men had died. Others were wounded. I healed everyone, getting a round of thanks in return. "Marshal, sorry to hear about the 2 dead." "Thank you, if it wasn't for Ska, we may have lost a few more." "How did your fight go?" "All 3 leaders are dead. They ran into the dungeon to try and hide." The marshal grunted in acknowledgement. "A tough day for everyone. Feel free to loot the 3 you killed. Come by the office tomorrow to collect your bounty." I nodded to the marshal. The 3 of us left, while the marshal and his remaining men collected the bodies and searched the camp. Ska and I had already looted the 3 men. They had nothing fantastic. Mine had a couple of small storage rings, the sword, some studded leather armor, and a few thousand credits. The archer's items were lost to the fire, which was a shame, pretty sure his bow had been enchanted. Ska's target had 2 enchanted daggers, a storage ring, and a decent leather chest piece. Martin managed to collect a few items from his kills but nothing magical. We pooled all of the credits, totaling 4,500. It would be a good starter fund to help us build out the house. I knew Martin wanted to leave as soon as possible, but we needed to wait for Fiona to return anyway, so it was better to make use of the time wisely. I took all of the items we were selling and went to the bazaar. It was one of the temporary layout kinds. That was better for us, less likely we would catch the eye of someone that didn't like what I was trying to do. I couldn't imagine flooding the market with enchanted items would be seen in a good light. I purchased cheap, yet well-crafted items. Swords, daggers, shields, maces, spears, etc. After selling the other gear, I was able to spend around 6,000 on the weapons. I purchased them all at one shop, but once they were enhanced, they would be sold to multiple shops. I had to put my shoulder into the ill-fitting door to our house, to get it to open. It was on my to-do list for fixes, I just didn't have time at the moment. Ska and Martin had talked the marshal into letting them run the dungeon in the valley. I warned them about the traps but wished them luck. They couldn't help me with my work, so there was no point in having them waste their time sitting around when they could level. We were going to need all the help we could get if we had to go up against another head of the Black Dragon. It took 3 days to finish the first set of weapons. Martin and I cashed them in at the bazaar, netting nearly 30,000 credits. It was a hefty chunk of change, but not enough to do even half of the upgrades to the house. We spent half of it on procuring new weapons. I even threw in some armor to enchant. Armor would take less time and sell for more, but the market for it wasn't as large. For one, armor, even magical, didn't resize itself to the wearer. So most people preferred to get tailor-made armor. Magical items were also an item I could craft, but those tended to take far longer and required a finer touch. For now, I decided to not fiddle with those. 5 more days of work allowed me to finish most of the second batch of items. Ska and Martin had both leveled. Martin was now level 12, he picked up an ability called Baleful Slash. It imbued his summons with corrupting energy. This made their attacks far more deadly. It had its drawback though, making it so the summon could only last half as long. Ska finally got a new skill called Debilitating Strike. It allowed him to render an opponent's appendage useless for 10 seconds. Of course, he immediately wanted to challenge me to a duel to test his new skill. I had to disappoint him. Sorry, Ska. I have to finish these items and then get to work on the house. He grumbled and walked off to sulk. I finished up the last few items and called for Martin. We unloaded the items to several different merchants. Even that didn't alleviate some suspicious questions. I met up with Martin to get his half of the money so I could purchase the materials I needed. As always, the mithril was the most expensive portion. Unlike the previous house and the individual plates, I was going to combine all of the plates into one massive array. I figured this would even out the ride and possibly make it so the house truly floated through the sky, instead of just bobbing up and down. The directional plates would still be individual, but there would be twice as many of those. I found a smith capable of making the plates to the specifications I requested. That was the easy part. Now I needed to locate 2 more mana hearts. One to power a shield and one to power the cloak. I already knew I couldn't run them concurrently based on previous tests, but this way we could fly without worrying about being spotted during the day. I also picked up a remote viewing device. It was a crystal ball that allowed you a third-person perspective over an area. It was used in castles during sieges to direct troops. The one I purchased had a limited range of 1,000 feet. Just enough to give us time to turn and avoid something. There was one last item I picked up, but I wasn't sure if it would come together in time, so I stuck it on the back burner. I had a lot of work to do and Fiona should be back in about a week. Chapter 94, The Fortress. I climbed through the tight space, the finished surface of the fortress on one side and the remains of the rocky hill on the other. I did this to hide my work. The fewer people that knew about this the better. I was inspecting a set of runes I had just finished carving. With this much surface area, mistakes were bound to happen. I already had to melt down a section of runes and recast the mithril. With my work, I hadn't seen Ska or Martin for days. They were around, just busy getting the fortress stocked and trying to level. I wiped the sweat from my brow and moved to the next section. Hours of grueling labor later, I crawled up from the crawl space. The room was dark, a single small light running off the mana generator, the only thing providing light. The open cavern was no more. There were now 2 floors, with a staircase running along one of the curved walls. There were even walls. They didn't connect fully to the ceiling. I left gaps at the very top of each wall and room. It was a trick I had figured out while playing with the teleportation scrambler. Now even with the doors closed, the whole fortress should still be protected. I walked over to the shower. Yes, we had a shower and fresh clean water. I used my skills to carve out an aquifer in the floor. It held over 1,000 gallons of water, and everything we used, minus what we drank, was recycled. I would like to say I designed those systems, but I didn't. Martin had found them while searching for beds and other items to stock the place with. After the nice hot shower, I went to get a snack from the kitchen. The fridge was taken from an abandoned house, along with the stove. Another mana generator sat in the corner powering those. Central wiring was low on the to-do list, but this worked for now. I topped off the generator with mana and grabbed some leftovers from the fridge. I assumed Martin and Scott were asleep, but they may be out and about still. I shrugged and sat at the table. The sandwich was delicious, definitely one of Martin's creations. I still didn't know how the man got all these spices and sauces. The meal complete, I cleaned up and headed to bed. I was awoken early the next day by a pounding on the front door. I was tempted to remain in bed and let one of the others get it, but the pounding continued. "All right," I groaned, "I'm coming, hold your damn horses." I got out of bed and willed a set of clean clothes on through my ring. With a self-satisfied smile, I padded down the stairs to the massive new door set into the entrance. The portal was heavily enchanted with hidden runes, and anyone dumb enough to force their way in would have a really, really bad day, assuming they survived. I checked the security cam to see who it was, another device we stole out of a house and powered by a mana engine. I didn't recognize the visitor, some woman. To be on the safe side, I donned my armor, the weak mana shield snapping into place. I had to suppress the hate-filled thoughts about those dwarves before I opened the door. I pressed my hand to the activation plate, powering down the enchantments and unlocking the door. All via the new hidden tattoos. I opened the heavy door. "This better be good," I said grumpily. The woman jumped a bit as I startled her. Sorry, is this where Ska lives? She asked quietly. I stared at her in confusion, yet. Oh, is he here? I'm not sure, but going by the fact that he didn't answer the door and I had to wake up and do it myself, I'm going to go with no. Who are you? Why are you here? Ska said he would teach me tricks to be a better hunter. I blinked a few times, deciding to use identify on the woman. Feline Hunter level 5. I was about to send the woman away when Ska approached down the tunnel. Good, you're here, he crooned happily. Let me get my gear, and I will teach you. This is okay, yes, Paul. I shrugged, fine with me, just leave a note or something next time. When the woman tried to follow Ska in, I stopped her. Sorry, the house is under construction and the areas are a bit dangerous. Best if you stay out here. I could tell she didn't believe me, but I didn't care. I stood there and glared at her the entire time. She looked away awkwardly and I smiled internally at the petty little victory. Ska returned a minute later. Ready, see you later tonight. I grunted in confirmation. After they left, I closed and locked the door, feeling the enchantments kick in again. Back to work, I said to the empty house. I was just about to head back into the crawl space when another knock came. I groaned loudly and turned around. I was actually happy to see this visitor. Fiona, you're back. Yes, I can see a lot has changed since I left. Was your trip successful? Yes, those dwarves never knew I was there. I found where they stashed most of our stuff, but it was heavily warded. There is a key that is needed to enter. Good to know. Were they able to repair my damage? Unfortunately, yes. If it wasn't for that beach, I would have never known where to look. Damn, was hoping it at least inconvenienced them. If anything, it put them on alert. You did kill about a dozen people with your attack. I learned that from listening to some conversations. Good to know it wasn't a complete waste. Learn anything else? What about Bella? Yeah, it seems this clan of dwarves are outcasts. I witnessed them attacking a few groups of outsiders. As for Bella, there was no sign. They likely would have killed her since she was already bonded to another. I thought as much, but the confirmation still stung. So essentially, they are bandits. Well, that makes things easier. What about defenses? They had plenty of mana cannons, all of their tunnels are sealed off, but I found that supposed infrastructure you mentioned. The stuff they say you damaged. That was a water filtration system. There were some air vents as well. Everything was cleverly hidden. I still don't understand why they let you go. I'm not sure either. Perhaps they were afraid we belonged to a larger force? Really, it doesn't matter. They chose their path, it's just a shame we won't be able to attack them anytime soon, I said, scratching my head. Fiona looked at me in surprise. I thought that was the whole reason you were building this, she replied, gesturing to the walls. It was true, that was the original purpose. I filled her in on what we had learned since she left. You're right, that is a much more pressing issue. But we can't just let the dwarves get away with stealing and killing. Oh, we won't. Since we have to go back that way anyway, I have a plan, I said coldly. Well, it was more an idea than a plan, but if it worked it may even give us a leg up on the dwarves. It had come about when I was searching the bazaar for something to counteract what the dwarves used on us to render us unconscious. My search led to an alchemist. After explaining the effect of whatever the dwarves used, he hypothesized that it was a concoction called the sleeper. It could be injected but was just as potent in an aerosolized form. I did purchase a few vials of a substance that would prevent the effects of this mixture, but that was for my original plan of storming the dwarven stronghold. Plus, if it wasn't this so-called sleeper poison, it would do very little to counteract the effect. That had been before we were in a rush. Now it was time for Plan B. Follow me, I said, unlocking the door and heading out. We had to trek to the outskirts on the far side of town. Martin and I discovered this facility by accident while searching outlying buildings for supplies. On the outside, it looked like a normal, if run-down warehouse, the name East Texas Chemical Supply in faded letters on the building. The inside was another matter. I slipped through the same opening we used the previous time. Once inside, I made a beeline to a room near the back, Fiona following quickly behind. Inside the room was an elevator that required a keycard. A sign above the elevator read "Authorized personnel only, trespassers will be shot on sight." Now you didn't go through all this trouble unless you wanted to secure something important. While the sign didn't say property of the US government, it had the same text and spacing that they used. "Can you go below and tell me what you see?" Fiona nodded, floating through the elevator and down through the floor. I waited 10 minutes until she returned. "Some sort of storage facility, they look like an armory of some sort." "Jackpot." "Yeah, that's what I hoped." "Anyone down there?" I didn't see signs that anyone had been down there. "Good," I replied, not wanting to get into a fight if this place was what I thought it was. I tore open the floor to the elevator and dropped into the hole. The tunnel dropped down hundreds of feet and I was forced to use my wings to slow my descent. When I saw the floor approaching, I activated my area of denial, landing with a loud boom. I peeled open the doors and climbed out of the elevator shaft. The area was too dark for me to see, so I pulled out a glow rock. The magical item bathed the area in a light blue glow. They were perfect for use in areas where there could be explosions, so I had purchased a few from the bazaar. What I saw was row upon row of missiles and bombs. I had been correct, it was a secret military storage facility. I walked along the rows, inspecting the tags. Most were simple explosive munitions. I found some that held napalm, bunker busters, even a few air fuel explosives. Those weren't what I was looking for. We passed through dozens of rows of the deadly devices until we got to a thick metal door. The sign above reading chemical weapon storage, hazmat precautions required. I paused for a minute, debating on this course of action. With a heavy sigh, I donned the hazmat suit, thankful that it worked with my ring since it needed a second person to help zip it up completely. I checked the oxygen supply, noting it was topped off. I used Earth Fist to manipulate the wall around the door. Once a large enough opening was created, I stepped through. The room was smaller than the previous room, only about a quarter of the size, but even one of the warheads inside could kill off the population of an entire town. And there were hundreds stored within the chamber. I recognized the names of more than a few of these chemicals, Hollywood doing their best to make them famous. "What are these?" Fiona asked. "Neurotoxins, and other deadly chemicals," I replied, my gaze sliding over a sign that said VX1. "So poison?" "Essentially, yes." I walked over to one of the devices. I didn't have to worry about anything being activated, the system rendered all powered systems inert. Still, I wasn't about to manhandle them. I found a set of tools and removed the cover. My dexterity was high enough that the process of pulling the warhead out took no more than a few minutes. What I was left with was the tip of a missile, with a metallic tube attached to the backside, about the size of a small air tank. I had to thank my high intelligence as I wouldn't have known where to even start disassembling the thing otherwise. I collected 4 of these devices from different chemical agents. It was overkill, but I didn't know if the dwarves would be immune to one or all of them. "So if you are going to use these devices to poison the dwarves, why not just take the whole thing?" "I would, but they are inert, and even if they weren't, there are probably safety features built in that I won't be able to bypass. I'm not even sure if the substances are still viable, but it's the only option other than trying to find a vendor in the bazaar." Fiona cringed at hearing that. "I would recommend against that course of action. While you certainly could find one if you looked, talking to the wrong person would get you arrested at best. Yeah, guess it's not a good idea to advertise the fact you are looking for a large amount of deadly poison." No, it would not be." We left the room and I sealed the entrance I made. I didn't want to leave these deadly weapons around for any idiot just to stumble upon, but it would be too dangerous for me to try and blow the place up. I used my spells to seal the bottom of the elevator shaft. I then carved some defensive runes into it. I even used some of my spare mana hearts to add more protection. I did this 6 more times as we made our way up the shaft. Someone was going to have to be very determined to get in or have the ability to pass through solid matter. I couldn't do anything to stop that though. At least not without another teleportation scrambler. Once at the top, I collapsed the elevator and the room on top of it. That was the best I could do to keep curious people away. We hurried back to the fortress so I could finish the preparations. I asked Fiona not to tell the others about what we did today. "You are going to have to tell them eventually," she replied. "I know, and I will, just, not right now." She agreed, reluctantly. I could tell she wasn't fully on board with my choice. That was fine. I would carry this sin if I had to. At least the Geneva Convention was no longer enforceable, I thought. Hard to enforce something when some magic is by far worse. Once home, I climbed into the crawl space and got back to completing the house. Chapter 95, Difficult Choices. The fortress took another 2 days to complete. Then I had to create a delivery device for the nerve gas. I thought about how the dwarves operated their stronghold and came up with a design. The football-sized device looked like a top. I tested it repeatedly, by dropping it from as high up as possible. It worked perfectly, landing, tip down, and burrowing into a false tunnel I created below the ground. There it would stop and release its gas. Despite their size, this device was the most intricate thing I had ever produced. It had dozens of magical circuits running along thin mithril pathways. They had a built-in levitator feature, that absorbed the impact of the fall, allowing the device to slowly penetrate the ground where it landed. With the stored mana, it could push up to 5 meters of dirt or rock out of the way before it ran out of juice. A sensor rune would cut the power when it detected a large void. This had been tricky to implement as it could not be activated until the device had already sunk into the ground where it landed. After a few tries, I had figured out the trick. I also implemented 3 rings on the device. These would have to be manipulated into the correct position to activate the item. Even then I included a separate activation rune, that like the door, could only be triggered by the corresponding tattoo. I flew down and retrieved the prototype. Everything was intact and I stored it away. I sealed up the hole it made, then donned the hazmat suit and sealed up the entrance to this tunnel. I didn't want anyone accidentally stumbling upon it if I fucked up and released the gas. 4 devices appeared from my ring, sitting on stands around me. These were larger, about the size of a large watermelon. I rotated the rings on the first device until I heard a slight pop. I pushed the top down and twisted until it came loose. The cavity had been designed to perfectly fit the warhead. I still had to finish modifying those. I pulled out one of the warheads, inspecting it again. I only ever did this inside the tunnel, far from any living being. I placed the device on another stand and pulled out a ring. This ring would join the 2 systems together, allowing the device I built to activate it, instead of the missile programming. Ever so carefully, I slipped the ring over the warhead. I lined up the connection points and clicked them into place. I sighed in relief when it didn't go off. While I had dabbled in electrical engineering before changing my major to information technology, I wasn't 100% sure this would work. I wasn't a rocket scientist after all. I chalked the success up to my high intelligence again and my ability of almost perfect recall. I lifted the warhead and slowly placed it within the chamber on my device. The ring could only be inserted in one way, a fail-safe just in case. I gave it a good push and heard the connections click into place. I screwed the cap back on and rotated the rings to secure the device. I breathed out a sigh of relief and stored the device. Only 3 more to go. It was launch day. The fact that I hadn't killed myself or anyone else while making those bombs was a miracle. It was also something I never wanted to have to do again. I was standing in the control room, 3 gems were embedded into a short wall, within easy reach of a swivel chair, bolted to the floor. The chair came from an RV and was way safer than being tossed around like before. I had included 2 other chairs for the others to secure themselves in just in case of turbulence or combat. All that remained was to test the remaining systems. Stealth field active, I spoke into the radio. Copy that, everything is good from the front door, a crackling reply came from Martin. The radios had been cobbled together and only ran on a portable mana battery, which wasn't much smaller than a mana generator. It wasn't ideal but it worked. Ska can no longer see the structure, he replied from within the crawl space. Okay, Martin, see what happens when you open the door. The exterior door worked with proximity, instead of direct contact like the interior door. All you needed to do was feed a tiny amount of mana into the tattoo and the door would swing open. Door is open, stealth field is still active. Hoo boy, it's weird seeing a floating entryway. Good to know it will still work when open, although it is drawing about 4 times the power. Okay, I'll close the door again. After Martin sealed the door I moved on to the next item on the list. Next test is the shield. I turned off the invisibility field, checking on the power. It had dropped to 3800 from 4000. With the door closed, it would last 2 hours, without being charged. Alright, Ska, move to the alcove, I'm going to activate the shield. The alcove was just an area I had carved out around the outside of the crawl space. It made it quicker to transition between one side and the other. It was functioning as a place for Ska to inspect the shield from now. I am in position, he said over the radio. Activating the shield in 5. I counted down over the radio, turning the shield on after I hit 1. The building vibrated as the shield came online. I had to adjust a few settings on the control panel until the fortress stopped shaking. Alright, how's it look from outside? Looks okay, but I think you broke the mooring points, Martin said. The entrance shifted past the tunnel. Shit, alright. Ska, how's it look down there? Martin is right, some of the posts have collapsed. The rest have been broken by the shield. I was afraid something like this might happen. Not a big deal, it just meant I would have to set the house down on the landing gear. Okay, I'm going to try and rotate the house back. Ska, you are going to have to exit the crawl space as I am going to activate the landing gear. I am leaving the space now, I will let you know when I meet up with Martin. It took a few minutes for Ska to climb through the emergency tunnel and out through the exit. The whole time I kept an eye on the crystal capacity. It had only dropped 25 points, remaining steady at 3975. Meanwhile, Fiona floated behind me and watched the whole thing. This is quite impressive, she murmured. You ain't seen nothing yet, just wait till we get in the air, I responded with a grin. Ska is with Martin, Ska replied over the radio. Roger, let me know when the door is in position again. I turned off the shield, a grinding pop could be heard as the building settled. Before it broke the rest of the pillars, I activated the flight controls. They were at less than 1% power, but even then the house slammed into the top of the dome covering the construction site. Whoops, I said, only Fiona around to hear my mistake. I adjusted the output on a fine control knob, lowering the house. I couldn't see what I was doing as the remote viewing orb only showed the hill that still encased the house. I was relying on Martin and Ska to help with this bit. A little to the left, Martin said over the radio. Rotation wasn't a high priority feature, so this was taking some time. After about 10 minutes of fiddling, I got confirmation that the door was close enough that they could open it. I activated the landing struts. 6 legs came out at an angle and were linked to a leveling system. With this, we could land on anything that had an incline of up to 10 feet over the length of the building. Bring it down just a bit, Martin said. I lowered the house another 6 inches before he confirmed it was good. I turned off the control panel and headed towards the entrance. The others were already entering through the inner door when I arrived. So everything was good? Yes, they replied in unison. Fantastic. Are there any more provisions or items we need? No, should be all set on that front. We have enough food stored in those rings you embedded into the wall to keep us going for months. That was another little thing I implemented. The rings, as he called them, were a dozen storage rings, molded into the wall. If the worst should happen again and someone did manage to break in and steal everything, those would keep us going. They were hidden and could only be accessed by a panel on the second floor and by someone who had the tattoo. Martin still rubbed his hand occasionally, where the hidden tattoo had been added. After the dwarven fiasco, he understood the need for better security. The air in the house wouldn't be too much of a problem. While the house was sealed, we had 3 air scrubbers. It would last for a week if need be. In the worst-case scenario, we could catalyze the water for more oxygen. Alright, get stuff secured. I'm going to go say bye to the marshal. The door to the police station opened and the bell above gave a ring, letting someone know I was here. Hey, Paul, what brings you by today? Was hoping the marshal was around, wanted to say goodbye. You're leaving? Sorry to hear that, you and your friends have been a great help and will be missed around here. The marshal is here, let me go get him for you. The man returned with the marshal in tow. Frank tells me you're leaving. Don't suppose I can convince you to stick around. I would if I could, I reply, shaking the man's offered hand. But I learned some news that my friends and I need to deal with. Well, if you need any help, let us know. I will walk you back. I nodded at the man, accepting his offer. I said goodbye to the other officer as we walked out. Will you be back this way anytime soon? Not sure. It might be dangerous for this town if I do. The man grunted. I don't wish to pry into your past, hell knows I got my own skeletons. I smiled sadly and told part of my story. After the system came about, I made my way to my hometown. Unfortunately, I made some powerful enemies on the way there. I was captured and made into a slave. As you can see, I escaped, but not before enacting my revenge on the people who perpetrated the heinous act. The news I got pertains to the leaders of that group. Apparently, I didn't get all of them. Now they are hunting for me. The man stopped and looked at me. Well, that's not what I expected to hear. So you think they might come here? No, I know they are after me, so I plan to go deal with the issue myself. You're only 3 people, how do you plan to do that? I smiled again, only this time it wasn't sad. Watch my hill from a distance and in a few minutes, you will see. Thanks for trusting us, Marshall, and if I don't see you again, take care. We shook hands again and I finished walking to the hill. The Marshal sat on an abandoned car, while he smoked a cigarette. There you are, Marshal, why you sitting out here? One of his officers asked. Not quite sure, to be honest, Paul told me to watch his hill, so here I am. The man opened his mouth to reply when the ground shook. They both turned to the hill as dust rose around it. Rocks and trees tumbled off the sides as it shook ever more violently. The rising dust obscured everything until something rose above even that. The Marshal stared agape, dropping his cigarette as the structure of rock and magic rose into the sky. It floated there in defiance of gravity as the remaining bits of rock fell away, then it disappeared. Chapter 96, War Crime. Shield is off and invisibility is enabled, I stated to the others. They were all strapped into the other chairs, not that it was needed for this part, and the house barely even rocked. Breaking through the remaining rock above had taken a bit of effort, but I had prepared the area, making it easier to crack apart. I inspected the sensors that were installed. Altitude, wind speed, direction, all thanks to a donor plane, and hooked up to a mana generator. They weren't perfect, but it was far better than just guessing. I also uncovered the remote viewing device. All I could see was a plume of dust surrounding the area. I rotated it, making sure no part of the fortress was visible. Everything looked good to go. Ascending to maximum height, hold on. I cranked the output to the max, sending the fortress careening into the air. We were pressed into our chairs as the building rose. It was much more responsive than I thought it would be. When I checked the altimeter, it read 500 feet. That was easily triple what we were capable of with my old design. I checked the mana draw, it was about double. I would need to get another mana heart to supplement it at a later time. In the meantime, if it ever ran out, it could draw from the other 2 crystals. I figured it was much more important to stay in the air than be invisible or have a shield. While the structure didn't have a front or back, being round, I still chose to think of the door as the back. At least while we were flying. I rotated the fortress until we were facing east, then I engaged the drive plates. It was a slow start, but once it picked up speed it was far faster than the house had been. Being not a flying brick probably helped in that regard. In less than 10 minutes we were cruising along the coast at 40 miles an hour. At this altitude, we seemed to be immune to the effects of the terrain below us, which was a godsend. No more bobbing up and down with every little hill. Everything seems to be running smoothly. Martin, see if the charging port works. The charging port was just a mithril line that ran to the main crystals. There was one for each station, this allowed anyone in the seats to charge the crystals. I watched him place his hand on the one for the cloak. As he fed mana into it, I watched it slowly fill the device. It worked, but it doesn't seem to be as efficient, not that I'm surprised. Try the others. He did as asked and they all worked. I had Scott try his, using a charged mana stone, since he didn't have much mana. That worked as well. Good to know if we got into a bad situation. It wouldn't cost a whole lot to stock charged mana hearts and leave them in the secure storage for emergencies. Alright, that worked. Ska, hold off on using those stones unless we are in serious trouble. Martin, please keep the cloak topped off, I will do the main power. Both nodded. We coasted into the secluded beach where the dwarves resided sometime after sunset. The speed at which we could cover ground was impressive. We're here, I said, locking the controls and standing up. Being the control center, this room was near the center of the structure on the bottom level. I did make one adjustment before we left. A tube led straight out the bottom, covered by a plate that slid over it. Why are we stopping? Martin asked, eager to make sure his sister was safe. I didn't share his eagerness. We are at the dwarven stronghold. Initially, it was my idea to attack them under the cover of darkness, but I threw that plan out the window, seeing as we have more pressing matters. Okay, then why are we here? It's too dangerous to let them continue preying on locals. So I came up with another way to attack them. I pulled out one of the bombs, setting it into place above the tube. This and 3 other bombs will be dropped. They will release a poison gas that should deal with them. By the time we return they should be dead or severely weakened. Then we can finish them off once and for all. Martin looked a little pale, I couldn't blame him. He hadn't seen the shit that I had seen. You sure that is the right thing to do? It's either that or keep letting them dictate the terms. From what Fiona told me, they are attacking other people now. Whether or not we caused that change, I can't say. What I can do is stop them. Then why tell us? Why not just drop it and go? Because, if the three of us do this together, perhaps the system will split any experience. I wouldn't suggest this if we didn't need all the help we could before taking on the Black Dragon. Ska hissed in disapproval. Ska wants no part in this. There is no honor or glory in it. I couldn't argue that point. I turned to Martin to see what he would say. Fine, but only because getting stronger might help me protect my sister. He walked over, looking nervous. What do I do? Just wait there, I have to arm it first. I spun the 3 discs until they lined up, creating the correct runic pathway. Then I pressed my hand against the activation plate. Okay, help me lower it over the opening. The bombs weren't all that heavy and we got it into place. On 3, let go. I had a brief moment of self-doubt on whether I was doing the right thing as I counted down. I shoved that thought to the back of my mind as I finished the countdown and released the weapon. The world would not give me a second chance if I was weak. Besides, these fuckers signed their death warrant when they attacked us. How those deaths came about was irrelevant. I watched as the weapon fell through the hole and was accelerated by the levitator field below the ship. I had a moment of panic as the object rocketed down at speeds it wasn't built to handle. Thankfully the design seemed to slow it down, then its own field kicked in just before it punched into the ground. We moved and repeated the process 3 more times, alternating who actually activated the weapon. I didn't know how the system was going to determine who earned the experience but figured it couldn't hurt. That's the last one. Fiona, can you stick around for an hour to see if the objects worked, then catch up to us? We will pause near that town where we killed those cartel people. She nodded, flying down through the bomb chute before I closed it off. All right, let's get moving. We didn't have to wait an hour or even another 5 minutes. A scroll of death notifications lit up my feed before I turned them off again. I sucked in a deep breath, pushing aside the fact that I had murdered dozens again. I looked over to see how Martin was handling it. Yep, about as well as I thought, which meant not very. The rest of the trip was silent, even when Fiona joined up with us again. She simply nodded and we continued on our way. By morning we had made it past Ska's village. I had reduced our speed during the night so we could get some rest. Not that I was able to sleep with what I had done. Even if I knew it was necessary. I had yet to look at the message blinking in my vision. With a sigh, I clicked on it. Congratulations, you are the first person on your planet to deal over 250,000 damage with one attack. 250,000 XP awarded. I suspected Martin had gotten a few messages like this as well. It gave me a good estimate of how many dwarves there might have been in that stronghold. Too many to take on was the conclusion I came to. You have reached level 17, modifiers increased by 1, 2 free skill slots available. You have earned the title Reaper. Those you have marked for death cannot escape your grasp. Through concentration, you can pinpoint their direction. The range is limited. I rubbed my face and sighed. It was an excellent title to have, especially being a bounty hunter. But did the system really have to rub in the fact that I just murdered a bunch of people by giving me a title? I decided to focus on something else, checking my stats since they hadn't changed in a long time. Paul Fuller Mantra Enchanter level 17. Strength, 13, plus 2, modifier x18. Endurance, 19 modifier x36. Agility, 15, plus 2, modifier x18. Perception, 17 modifier x18. Intelligence, 22 modifier x36. Wisdom, 14 modifier x18. Charisma, 11 modifier x18. Luck, 14 modifier x18. HP, 684, 752. Mana, 792. Mana Rigon, M252. The bump was nice but hardly noticeable at this level. Next, I looked to see what skills I had unlocked. Turns out not much. I got a bump to rejuvenate. I could now heal 175 health instead of the 125 from before. That used up one of my free skill slots. Reverberating Strike, for the next 2 seconds all of your blows act as if the target is not wearing armor, cost 60 mana, cooldown 4 minutes. That was a no-brainer, I grabbed that skill. It wasn't like my old options were very impressive. Now that I was done, I looked over to Martin, using Identify. He had leveled twice from that attack and was now level 14. I decided not to ask him about his skills, imagining that would be a sore subject right about now. Even Fiona had gained a level and was now 14. Turns out she got a reduced amount of experience from whatever I did. Though she didn't get any new skills, she did look more substantial in her visible form. That could be a trick of my eyes though. After resting and eating a quick meal, we got back on the way. Our haste turned out to be in vain though. We hovered over the burned out remains of Armin. Not even a tendril of smoke remained, telling me that the city had been burned to the ground quite some time ago. The townsfolk had all been rounded up and executed, their heads stuck on poles and left to rot. Martin was standing near the corpse of his sister. She was wrapped in an old curtain after we helped him remove her from the cross. She had been stripped naked and beaten to death. The words carved into the board, a message meant for me. This is what happens to those that cross the black dragon. If you want to stop this, you know where to find me. You cannot delay the inevitable. I ground my teeth and clenched my fists in rage. Even though I despised Martin's sister, she didn't deserve this. After we helped lay the townsfolk to rest, we flew to Gok's compound in the desert, what was left of it. Martin was silent, stuck in his head and grieving for his sister. The walls had been demolished and everyone had been butchered. It looks like they put up more of a fight than Armin though. There was red blood mixed in with the orange blood of Gok's people. There was another message for me. We will destroy everything you hold dear and any that help you until you face judgment at the hands of the black dragon. As we were burying these bodies, Martin spoke. We have to stop them, he said quietly. We will, I replied with conviction I didn't feel. Can we even take them at our current strength? Not one to lie about something so critical, I told him the truth. No, I don't think we could. He nodded, probably expecting this answer from me. Once we cleared the dead, we flew towards Biloxi. We could see signs of smoke in the distance, but as we got closer it looked like most of the town was still intact. That could mean a few things. Either the black dragon was still here or they were driven off. Neither option was ideal, so I set the fortress down in the desert, out of sight of the city. Stay here, while I check it out. I am coming with, Ska stated. I sighed but didn't stop him from exiting the structure. We made our way to the outskirts of the city. Now that we were closer we could see the damage. A large chunk of the city facing Armin's direction had been burnt down. A wall had been erected beyond that point, stopping the invaders in their place. That's new, I mumbled. Smells of ash and death, Ska added. Well, let's go say hi. Chapter 97, The New Lord. As we approached the city wall, I could see guards patrolling the top. They were mixed race as far as I could tell. 2 guards at the entrance stopped us. Halt and state your business. Bounty hunter, we are tracking the group that burned down Armin. Any ID to prove you are what you claim? I fished out the deputy badge that the marshal had given me when we started working for him. The guard took it, inspecting the item, then looking at me. It's just a hunk of metal, where is the enchantment? Look, I'm from Earth, there isn't exactly a thriving enchantment community. This is what I was given. If you need to verify its authenticity, send a message to a Marshal Sumner in Houston, Texas. Come with me, the guard ordered. I rolled my eyes when he turned away but followed along, using Identify as I did. Shipoic Sentinel level 24. I stumbled when I read the information. That might help explain why the black dragon had been driven off. I used Identify a few more times, glad I now had an upgrade to the skill that made detection harder. All of the guards were in the low 20s. Strong, Ska growled softly. I nodded. Shipoic led us to a new building. It looked like a palace. We were ushered inside. Wait here. Lord Victi will call you when he is ready. I nodded, sitting down in one of the chairs. I checked my watch, it had been 3 fucking hours. Ska was starting to pace, being cooped up for so long. Finally, the large double doors opened. Lord Victi will see you now. Asshole, I muttered quietly. We were led down another opulent hallway, richly decorated by paintings and expensive artwork. All the trappings of nobility and wealth. The butler, a level 14, opened the doors for us. So these are the bounty hunters, Please, have a seat. Lord Victi looked like a cross between an elf and those tall grey aliens from alien shows. He had large black eyes, grey skin, pointy ears, and a black mane of hair that started from a widow's peak and ended below his shoulders. He was tall, perhaps 7 feet with a slim build. That was hidden under a robe that probably cost more than the entire fortress. The rich red and gold robe had intricate silver spirals and designs woven through it. I realized that those silver threads were probably mithril thread. I had heard of it but never expected to see it in person. The thread was extremely hard to produce. Beyond that, the man was festooned with jewelry. So much magic radiated off him that I felt a palpable weight settle on me as I got closer. Before I sat down, I used Identify to see what I was dealing with. Lord Vic T High Mage / Enchanter 25/12. I suppressed a shudder. The man had waited to gain his second class at 20 and had gotten the second one to 12. That was the only reason to see the split level. Otherwise, it would have been combined like others I had seen. Mantra Enchanter, curious class, do you perchance make enchanted items? No. I create spells through words. What the hell, why did I tell him that? Pity, we have found so few new recruits in your world. I waited for him to continue for a full minute. As I was about to speak up he continued as nothing had happened. I apologize for the wait, we sent a courier to confirm your identity, he stated, waving his hand across the desk and depositing my badge. We have brokered a deal with this marshal, and have enchanted the badges of him and his men, any off-worlders should recognize them as legitimate. The man's halting form of speech was a bit annoying. So I tried to speed things along. Yes, you are here about the group that attacked Armin, and attacked my holding. Follow me. I will take you to the one we captured. You? Yes, he was the sole survivor in a group of 5, we have already questioned him, he is no longer of any use to us. The Lord led us down a flight of stairs and into a prison wing. An unconscious man hung limply from a set of shackles on the wall. With a wave of his hand, the door opened. You may take him if you wish, or simply kill him here, the Lord said without a hint of emotion. I turned toward the captive and used Identify on him. Michael Investigator level 17. Damn it, if even the lackeys were high level, that didn't bode well for us. Can I? You may question him if you wish. I will have a servant show you out when you are done. Lord Vic T turned and strode away. I was thankful for that, the man was creepy with his ability to intuit what I was about to say. I didn't think he was reading my mind. If he was, I would probably have been locked in here just from those thoughts alone. I was about to enter the cell when I heard someone clear their throat behind me. When I turned around to see who it was I spotted one of the servants. The Lord would prefer if you take your barbaric means of extracting information, elsewhere, the man replied in a formal tone. Okay, do you have a way for me to keep this man from using his skills? We can supply you with a set of null cuffs. All right. Excellent, that will be 1,000 credits, the man replied. I ground my teeth in frustration. Fine, here. I transferred over the payment, glad I had cashed in a few extra weapons so we wouldn't be without funds after the house was complete. The man handed me a set of silver gold bracelets. Put one on each wrist, and it will prevent him from using any abilities. The man then proceeded to press a button on the wall and the manacles holding the unconscious man up released. He collapsed to the floor, unmoving. I walked over and slapped the enchanted items on him. Ska, I'll carry him, you keep an eye out for trouble. I will be vigilant, the Grimalkin replied. I tossed the man over my shoulder after tying his arms and legs together. Then we headed out of the palace. The guards watched us as we left, and other than a few curious stares from locals, we left the town in peace. It was a far cry from the previous time I had been here less than 2 months ago. Fiona had been hovering above the outskirts of the city, making sure nobody followed us. Once she determined we were clear, she joined us. I couldn't tell if anyone was following, but you should know the city is protected by an invisible dome of energy. Yet, I got the feeling that they didn't want us to stick around. Too barbaric in our ways. They probably only relinquished the prisoner to earn some goodwill with the native population, I snorted. Not like I was going to go spreading tales of their generosity around. Come on, let's hoof it back to the fortress, I'm sure Martin is anxious for us to return. I concentrated power into one of my tattoos. It gave me a direction. Another safeguard, in case someone ever did manage to steal the thing, I would always know where to go looking for it. We trekked into the desert. The landing spot had been deliberate. I hoped the sandworms were deterrent enough to keep anyone far away. After a half hour, we came upon the cloak structure. Ska opened the door and the four of us went inside. We didn't have a cell but there were 2 spare rooms. We moved the stored items out from inside the room and tossed the man inside. The door locked as it shut and without a tattoo, the man wouldn't be able to exit. I would question him later. First I wanted to move the fortress. It was probably best that the stuffy lord had kicked us out. He didn't need to know the information I was going to drag out of this man. We sat down in the burnt remains of Armin a final time. I thought it a fitting place to question the man. Martin not so much. He had been angry and withdrawn ever since we buried his sister. Now that one of the killers was on board, he was irate. My refusal to let him question the man didn't help. To blow off steam, Ska and him went to take on that dungeon in the area. Fiona stuck around to make sure the man didn't overpower me. I was a bit miffed that she thought that the man could best me without the use of skills, but I shrugged it off. Crazier things had happened. As I opened the door, the man rushed at me, swinging for my face. I let the blow land as my shield flickered, absorbing the attack with ease. Then I kicked him in the balls. The man let out a high-pitched scream and went down in a heap. "Good, you're awake," I said, acting as if nothing had happened. He had managed to undo his rope bindings. Oh well. I produced my staff and before he could react, smashed one of his ankles. The man screamed again. "Now, Michael, do you know who I am?" The man looked at me, rage in his eyes but also understanding. "Good, then I won't need to explain to you why I am doing this. See, you people think you know how to terrorize someone to get them to do what you want," I said, walking around the man as I leisurely spun my staff. "Torture me all you want, you won't get anything from me," the man ground out. I laughed. "I bet you don't even know the meaning of torture," I added, stopping in front of him. "Oh, but I do. Did you know Charla tortured me for 4 months straight? You can't even begin to imagine the pain and suffering." The man shrunk back at my manic grin. "See, I learned a thing or two from her about pain. Oh, and rest assured, you won't die, or maybe you will," I added, casting second chance on the man right before my staff bashed his face in. "Stop. Please, I'll tell you what you want to know, just ask," Michael pleaded. I simply whistled as I walked around the man, healing his newest round of injuries. He wasn't there yet, but he was getting close. Once he was ready, I wouldn't need to ask him any questions, he would simply spill his guts just to make the pain end. I had already garnered a fair bit of useful information from the man. He was an ex-cop from New York, corrupt as they could get. He had worked for the Cottons for 5 years now. Specifically the older brother, Randy. Randy's operation was smaller than his dead brother's. But the men he employed were all ex-military, private contractors. I activated Flurry, turning the man's leg into paste. He screamed, tears streaming down his face as I cast Rejuvenate on him. I knew the pain of regrowing a broken limb was almost as bad as the initial break. The man tried to pass out, but I slapped him hard across the face, keeping him awake. I didn't feel an ounce of remorse for torturing this man. The shit that spewed out of his mouth, about the things he had done, warranted much more. He finally cracked 5 hours later after his second death experience. He wanted it to end, so he told me every sick detail. How his men had defiled the woman, what they did to Martin's sister after she tried to fight them off, everything. I left the man with 4 broken limbs and closed the door. I had the information I wanted. I now knew the number of men Randy Cotton employed along with a general idea of their levels. I also learned that they had no other trackers, and they did follow that damn ring down here. Randy might send another group looking, but if he did, he was only going to find a few burned out villages. From Michael's information, I could begin to start formulating a plan. Honestly, I would have just liked to drop a nuke on Chicago and be done with the whole thing. But I had no way of escaping from a blast of that size. Not that I knew where to start looking for a nuke. It wasn't like the old government made those locations public knowledge. I decided that wasn't a path I wanted to even begin to go down. There was always the nerve gas route, I thought as I wiped the blood from my hands. I dismissed that notion as well, deciding to never utilize that stuff again. Martin and Scar returned a few hours later. They had managed to get a first clear bonus for the Grove, earning a free skill point and a title that gave them a 10% movement speed buff in Forest. Ska was ecstatic about both. The movement because it was his preferred habitat, and the skill point since he only got one every 5 levels. I asked him what skill he chose. He said it was called Double Strike. Essentially it allowed one attack to be counted as 2. Hey, that's great. You might actually beat me now, I added with a grin. He growled appreciatively and headed off into the kitchen. I stopped Martin. I finished questioning our guest. And, he asked, shaking. I looked at him. He did help, would you like to be the one to deal the final blow? Martin stood there shaking for a good minute before he whispered hoarsely, no. I nodded. You are a far better man than I am, Martin, never lose that. Are you going to? He started to ask before I held up my hand. No, but he will get what is coming to him. You can't do this to me, Michael said, struggling to get free. Sure I can. Don't worry, you should survive the fall, I added, kicking him out the open door. He screamed as he tumbled through the air and down into the dark recess of the abyss. I heard a scream and a crunch echo up from below and I smiled. The creatures below could take care of the rest. I closed the door and we floated away silently while the terrible things in the darkness feasted on fresh meat. Chapter 98, Collecting a Debt. After we dropped off our passenger, I oriented the fortress toward the coast and the dwarven stronghold. It was time to collect the property that had been stolen from us. I had plenty of time to reflect on the information Michael had coughed up during the journey. One bit had become of interest to me, and that was about this so-called Stygian order. Apparently, that was the actual name of the Shadow faction. The assholes that had stranded me in the south, left to die in the desert. He didn't know much about them, other than the fact they had been hampering the Black Dragon efforts in New York as well as Chicago. According to Michael, other than the one kid they captured and killed in Chicago, there hadn't been any sign of the group. Even when Randy Cotton had arrived and used his force to eliminate the triad. I didn't know why the man bothered until I learned that all survivors were forced to offer a system oath to Randy. I tried to understand Randy's goals, but even Michael had been unsure of what they were. Something about purifying the country, blah, blah, blah. The guy sounded a lot like how the Nazis did, and it gave me a bad feeling. Thanks to Michael being so forthcoming with his information, I learned that Randy had managed to take control of New York. Not the state but the city. That was bad enough. What he had the people doing I didn't know. Michael had been sent out just as they finished their campaign of subjugation. It would bear looking into. We had time now that Michael was dead and Randy had no real way to further track my movements. We were essentially off his radar. I didn't think for a minute that that made us safe though. Randy sounded like a resourceful man. If he wanted to locate me again he could and would do so. Eventually, we would have to come head to head, but none of us were ready for that altercation yet. Perhaps if I could safely utilize my aura of rage things would be more even. Then again I had no clue what the man's class even was, let alone his skills. Even Michael didn't have that information, as it seemed Randy had an item that allowed him to detect people that used identification skills on him. And those people were quickly killed for the transgression. We hovered well away from the beach. The same one we had been attacked at and had retaliated in turn. Fiona was checking to see if anyone had survived the attack or returned while we were away. It took her an hour to verify everything was clear before I brought the fortress in for a landing. Martin and Ska, you stay here, I stopped Ska from arguing with me, unless you have a hazmat suit, it's too dangerous for you to come with. Fiona will watch my back while I locate our stuff. That reminded me, I went upstairs and emptied my backup ring, setting everything in one of the storage rooms. My main ring only held my armor and weapon. If I was forced to fight, that would be a bad thing. The dual doors acted as an airlock. While they weren't designed for that purpose, it worked out well. The rest of the house had been put in lockdown mode. Nothing in or out, all vents sealed by the runic magic. Once I closed the outer door, the stealth field would drop and the shield would spring up. If we did miss a dwarf or two, they wouldn't be able to breach the defenses before Martin could maneuver out past their range. I closed the inner door and donned the hazmat suit. I replaced the oxygen tank with one of the spares I had taken from the underground facility. Then I activated the exterior door, watching it swing open on silent hinges. The ramp extended, a similar mechanism to the landing struts I had designed. Not that I needed it. I could clear the 8-foot drop with a jump. Like our previous time here, the place was quiet, with no sign of habitation at all. The difference this time was the boreholes where the bombs had landed. I shined the makeshift flashlight down the hole. It was a glow rock set into an old flashlight body. It worked, just not well. The beach was dark, only illuminated by the overcast moon. I could hear the waves lap against the shore in the distance as I made my way over to the repaired rock face. The only difference I noted this time around was that all of the plant life was gone. Other than that, you wouldn't be able to tell I had caused the entire face to come crashing down. I used Earth Fist to open a hole into the mountain. It took 40 minutes to create an opening large enough for me to comfortably walk through. I didn't want to risk crawling through a smaller opening and tearing open my suit. That was probably a good thing, as a haze of smoke wafted out when I breached the dwarven tunnel. I hoped that wasn't residual poison. I waited for the smoke to clear before I stepped inside. I swung my flashlight back and forth, the light passing over a few corpses. "This way," Fiona said, motioning towards me. I nodded, stepping over the bloated corpse of a particularly girthy dwarf. We made our way farther into the tunnels. Eventually, we found ourselves in the same chamber that we had been tried in. Only this time it was empty. Fiona led me down one of the side tunnels, the same ones the judges had used. I had to stop to clear out one tunnel. A dead dwarf had blocked the passage. I simply moved him into my ring and ejected him when we got to a wider tunnel. Down the final tunnel, we came to our goal. In front of me stood two massive doors. Unlike the doors to the Judgment Hall, as I like to call it, these were not ornately carved. I could see a haze of power emanating from the protective enchantments on the doors though. This is the armory or treasury. I couldn't get any closer to find out for sure. Yet, I can see why. This may be a problem. I don't think I want to risk getting any closer. That leaves trying to disrupt the enchantments a no-go. I tried rubbing my face in thought, only to be brought up short by the plastic of my suit. There has to be a key or something that allows the dwarves past. I'm going to start searching the guards. Do you think you could locate the judges? Yeah, I recall where their rooms were located. I can start there. As Fiona flew off, I walked over to one of the guards. I was glad they were outside of the enchantment range. If they weren't, we might have been hosed if one of them had the key on them. The first guard had nothing but his weapon and armor. I took both because he wasn't going to need them anymore. "Stupid assholes should have left us alone," I mumbled. The second guard was the same, a weapon and armor. None of which was enchanted, same as the first one. Everything went into my storage rings. I went back the way we came, then headed down to the cells. There were a few more guards down there. I searched all of them. All of their gear went into my ring. I didn't find anything that resembled a key or item that might bypass the enchantment though. Fiona found me as I was finishing up my search. "There you are. I found the judges. They weren't in their rooms, that was why it took so long." "All right, lead me to them." "About that," Fiona said with a grimace. "What?" "Well, let's just say I don't ever want to learn more about dwarven mating practices." I shuddered. "Ew, that bad, hey." "All right, well, I still have to go check. What's one more nightmare?" I replied, following her down the winding corridors. There wasn't enough bleach to wash the image out of my mind. Our bombs had caught the three judges mid-orgy with what I assumed were dwarven women, but it was hard to tell with the beards. Heck, even if they were men, that would have been better than what I saw. I almost vomited into my suit. I would never look at another dwarf the same way after this. For all that was holy, I hoped that this clan was a clan of deviants. If not, I might have to just turn the world against the entire species to save everyone else from this debauchery. I was glad I was wearing a hazmat suit. If not, I would have been forced to burn my skin off after searching the bodies. I did come up with a key of sorts. The necklace had an intricate pattern inscribed on it that radiated powerful magic. My identify was what told me I had found what I was looking for. Vault key. The key worked. As we neared the vault, the enchantments deactivated and the doors opened. The inside was filled with piles of gear. Well, it looks like we weren't the only people they stole from. I know Fiona told me they attacked others, but the realization hit me just now. It made me feel a little better about gassing them to death. This was not going to be a quick task, I realized. I filled both of my rings and still hadn't located a single item of ours. Just as I was leaving, I saw something I recognized. It was Bella's storage item. Tears threatened to escape as I hurried over and picked up the item. I was shocked to realize Bella was still alive inside. I couldn't tell what her condition was though, and couldn't risk taking her out until we were safely away from this area. What I could do is add some food and water I had stored inside my ring. A transfer between the devices never came into contact with the environment, so it would be safe for her to consume. She would have to tear the water bottles open, but she was smart. The food was probably not to her preference, but if she were starving, that should keep her going. Sick fucks couldn't even give her a quick death, instead they just left her to rot in her cage, I growled. You found Bella? Yeah, let's get back to the fortress and unload this shit. I'll give Martin the hazmat suit and send him in to collect more. The process of switching out was time-consuming. Once back we took off with the door open so the wind could blow any residual trace of gas away. Then I had to remove the suit and hope we were successful. I waited an hour, keeping a close eye on my health and status bars. When nothing popped up I figured it was safe enough. The inner door was unsealed and I emptied the loot. I gave Martin both my rings and set the house down again. It took the rest of the night to empty the vault of everything. The fortress was jam-packed with shit. Luckily transferring items to storage rings removed any contamination. Still, I told Fiona to keep Martin away from the horror room. He had enough mental shocks lately, he didn't need another. Bella was in bad condition. Her feathers had mostly fallen out and she was weak from starvation and lack of water. I fed her in my room, losing a few fingers in the exchange. The pain was my price for being a shitty owner. After she ate and drank, she fell asleep. I cast Rejuvenate on her and some of her feathers did grow back. She would need a few days to recover fully though. As for our gear, it was all recovered. We also found letters about what the dwarves were doing here. They had been transported over, with most of their clan in tunnels. Once they realized this they set about grabbing up any wealth they could get their hands on. They had managed to contact their old world and the rest of their clan, including their king. It wasn't specifically stated in any of the documents I found but I got the feeling that this was a rather poor clan. And they wanted a fresh start in a rich new world. This was all done in preparation for when their king arrived. Now I did hope there was lingering poisonous gas in the tunnels. I couldn't imagine their king was a paragon of virtue if he allowed his subjects to perform depravities like this. It would serve the prick right. I also learned why they let us live. There were two factions of dwarves. One of the groups was adamantly opposed to the killing but not theft, they were a small minority amongst the clan here. Still, the dwarves had some weird laws and without a unanimous vote amongst the kin in the mountain, they couldn't take action against us. At least that was what I gathered from the documents I found. As for why they tossed us back in the house instead of leaving us to rot in the prison, I couldn't piece together. Perhaps us dying of starvation while outside of their stronghold was acceptable to both parties. I don't think they expected us to be able to escape, once they took everything. My attack on their stronghold caused the minority group to lose members and standing. The rest were killed or imprisoned as traitors, leading to the changing tactics of the remainder of the clan. I felt a little bad about that. But not enough for me to mourn their loss. We left the dead lying where we found them. Let anyone that came after puzzle out what happened. Even if the lingering gas didn't kill them, perhaps they would feel threatened enough to return to their own world. If I heard rumors of others being attacked in this area I would return. Chapter 99, Location, Location, Location. Seeing as we had no pressing business, at least not anything the four of us could do anything about, I decided to see if Fiona found any good dungeons to raid. Say, Fiona, you didn't happen to come across another horde dungeon while you were scouting, did you? Unfortunately, no. Plenty of other dungeons though. Looking for something specific. A challenge and a way to level. Although, a first clear bonus would be nice as well. I couldn't say about the first clear bonus, but I did come across a level 25, a level 19, and a level 16 dungeon. What do you guys think? Start at the easy one and work our way up. Yes, let us fight. Ska added excitedly. Martin just shrugged, he was still grieving his sister. Okay. Fiona, point us in the right direction. It turns out the dungeon wasn't far. We landed near the base of the mountain on the western face. We would have to climb a way to get to it. There just wasn't anywhere closer to land. We climbed up the scree-covered slope as the winds buffeted us. The dungeon opening was set back from an outcrop. Angry screeches met us as soon as we got near. I was forced to duck as a creature flew at me. I hear Ska howl as he leaped upon the flying beast, riding it to the ground. The scaly creature was about the size of a Saint Bernard. It had leathery wings that attached along its body and its hind legs. While Ska wrestled with the beast, it tried to bite at him with its long neck. I couldn't afford to help him though, as I was fighting off my own. I swung my staff, bashing the creature in the neck as it flew at me. I used Identify as the creature scrabbled back to its feet. Young cockatrice level 15. Now I had played D&D as a teen and this thing didn't resemble a chicken at all. Its face was more reminiscent of a dinosaur, teeth and all. My target hissed at me, pulling its sinuous neck back to strike at me. Before it could strike, Fiona stabbed it through the back. It screeched in pain and snapped at her, but she had already phased out. It was enough time for me to crack it across the head. This time I activated the enchantment on my staff. I wasn't sure that was needed, as I heard a loud crack and the creature went limp. Ska and Martin had taken care of theirs, so I scanned the area for any more before I heard Ska groan in pain. "I need help," he croaked. I ran over to see what the issue was. He sported numerous deep scratches from the claws of the creature. Not a big deal, except for the fact that stone was slowly spreading from the wounds. I held the fidgeting Grimalkin down while I used cleanse. This particular infection was much stronger than my skill, and I had to use my spell 4 times to clear his system from the disease. After, I healed his numerous wounds. "You good?" He nodded, getting slowly to his feet. "Martin, how about you, any wounds?" "No, it never got through my shield." "All right," I said, "you guys good to continue?" Everyone nodded. I guess they were as eager to level as I was. Although, for different reasons. You have entered the Cavern of the Silent Sentinels, level 16 dungeon. Recommended team size 5 people of level 17 or higher. I didn't understand the name of the dungeon until we made it to the first room. There, scattered about the room, were dead dwarves, frozen in stone. Seeing the bodies, I realized the first clear bonus was unlikely. Still, with the high level of the creatures, it would make for plenty of experience. The 4 of us dispatched 3 more of the cockatrice. With the low ceiling, the creatures were easy to deal with. Ska was the only one I had to keep my eyes on. Everyone else had a way to avoid taking damage. The next room we entered was a massive cavern. I couldn't even estimate its size. It stretched far into the distance, and massive stalactites and stalagmites dotted the area, making it hard to see. Even with this visual barrier, I could see movement on and near these pillars. The cockatrices were using a bony spur along their wing as a grasping appendage. Dozens were crawling on these towering formations. Then there was the smell. It smelled like someone had barfed on a wet dog. I had to swallow back a gag as the fetid wind blew toward me from deeper inside the cavern. We didn't need to worry about being stealthy. The creatures were making a racket with their screeching and moving about. "Martin, see if you can pull a few with your mana pistol. I don't want to fight them in the open if we can avoid it." "All right." Martin pulled out the weapon and fired at some of the closer creatures. He hit one and landed shots near a few others. The creature that was hit hissed angrily at us and took flight, but didn't come our way. The other 2 sprang off their perches and flew at us. I imbued my staff with lightning and air, then whipped the enhanced stunning gust at one of the creatures. The magic tore through one of its wings and it tumbled to the ground, squawking angrily as it tried to right itself. Martin's summon, what I like to call the tentacled horror, snatched the other creature out of the air. It looked like a cross between a squid and a deer. The whole head was replaced by long tentacles that hung limply to the ground most of the time. The rest of the creature was covered in barbed scales that would rend flesh if you rubbed up against them. Suckered feet replaced hooves, and the squelching sound it made when it walked was the thing of nightmares. It was even worse when the thing walked up walls or hung from a ceiling by those appendages. I couldn't suppress a shudder. The summon was slow to walk, but the tentacles on its face were lightning fast. The cockatrice didn't even have time to give an indignant squawk before the creature crushed it in its many-limbed grasp. Meanwhile, Ska had loped over and tore open the neck of the one I brought down. I sighed. This was going to be a slog. We stepped out of the dungeon a few hours later. Everyone was exhausted. The creatures hadn't been all that difficult as long as we kept pulling them in. The only time we got to a hairy part was when 10 of the creatures descended on us after we entered the main cavern. Ska was forced to hide in Martin's protective bubble while we fought off the creatures. Not because he couldn't kill them, but because I had my hands full fighting and didn't have time to make sure he wasn't turning to stone. I was thankful that the creatures were relatively dumb. And that we had a way to protect ourselves from their attacks. There was no boss monster within this dungeon, another sign that it had been cleared recently. Still, we did get some stuff out of clearing the entire thing. For clearing this dungeon, your team has been awarded 3,500 credits. Cockatrice Claws x 100. Cockatrice Venom Sacs x 100. I actually had an idea for the Venom Sacs. Something similar to the nerve gas bombs I had made before. I would have to develop a warhead though, but that should be simple enough. Also, this should be much safer to use than that nerve gas. It wasn't aerosolized, so you had to get the liquid inside your body for it to start to affect you. The only reason I was considering this instead of using more nerve gas was just how gruesome the nerve agents were. They weren't designed to kill quickly and painlessly. They were designed to spread fear and panic. I would never have considered using them if the dwarves had an open-air city. Also, mixing 4 types of toxins ensured a quick death. My idea for this new weapon was to take care of a problem we had run into before. It would mean going back around the mountain, but I think it would be worth it. Ska, what would you say if I said I had an idea for clearing out the abyss? Truly, he crooned, it would ease the minds of my people greatly, not having to worry about one day having a creature crawl up from below. Even after they kicked you out. They did what was best for the village. Weakness breeds trouble. I am ashamed to admit that I was weak and a fool. You think they will take you back? I asked. No, banishment is permanent. Even if I did wish to go back, I would not anymore. There is so much to learn about this world. Fair enough. It will take me a few weeks to create the devices. We might as well stick around and keep running the dungeon each day. So, that's what we did. Each morning we would run the dungeon. After we would do whatever for the rest of the day. Martin mostly kept to himself, still grieving over his sister. Ska would run off and hunt local wildlife, and Fiona would either stick around or join one of the others. It seemed like she spent most of her time talking with Martin. I was glad to see he wasn't just bottling up his emotions. Hopefully, they could help each other. I know that Fiona had some residual issues from her imprisonment. We had talked about it. It was one of the reasons she always chose to go scouting. The open spaces helped her cope. I tinkered with my warhead design. For this plan to work, I needed to aerosolize the venom. Considering that it wasn't designed to do that and would dry out quickly, the system had to act fast. After wasting 2 full days, I realized I was overthinking everything. I pulled out one of the corpses I used for testing my tattooing and injected the venom. I smiled after there was no change. I took the meat and left the fortress. Ska had told me that there were predators in the area. I set out the bait and waited. After an hour, a creature about the size of a medium dog started sniffing around. It located the food and dove in, tearing it apart. From my vantage point, I got to watch the creature turn to stone after eating the infected meat. Well, that makes things a whole lot easier. Instead of screwing around with warheads and dispersal mechanisms, I had Ska hunt a bunch of creatures. We cut the meat up into smaller chunks and injected the venom. I did end up having to cleanse us a few times while we did this. Any small cut led to petrification creeping in. Not a fun experience. The next day we flew over the expanse that was the abyss and dropped our tainted meat. It was the fastest leveling up I had done since the first days of the system. I also learned of the creature's levels finally. You have killed a level 42 Rift Stalker. You have killed a level 44 Rift Stalker. You have killed a level 40 Rift Stalker. You have killed a level 45 Rift Stalker. Etc., etc. I ignored the messages after the first dozen came through. I was really glad we hadn't let one of these creatures on board. There was no way we could have taken it in a straight-up fight. It was a good thing I didn't mind fighting dirty. By the time the messages stopped coming in, I had made it to level 19. Martin had catapulted all the way to level 17. Ska was now 17 as well, but I suspected he was on the cusp of hitting 18. And Fiona had hit 16. That experience deficit she suffered really sucked. Even with these new levels, I still didn't feel confident in taking on the Black Dragon, but we were getting closer. I looked over the new skills presented to me. Life Link, 410 SEC. Anyone who damages the target of the spell heals 25 damage per attack, must be within 3 m of the target to receive healing. Cost 50 mana, cooldown 3 minutes. Beacon, your words draw the attention of all enemies within a 20 m radius. 410 SEC. You are the target of everyone's aggression. Cost 100 mana, cooldown 10 minutes. Shockwave, your weapon produces a shockwave of force that strikes the target within 25 m for weapon damage and stuns them for 5 SEC. Cost 70 mana, cooldown 2 minutes. Mana Link, 430 m. You have a 5% chance of recovering 10% of the damage dealt with each attack as mana. Cost 75 mana, cooldown 1 hour. Seeing as I had no other decent options, I took these 4 abilities. I wasn't completely sold on Mana Link. A 5% chance wasn't much. Plus it was only a self-buff, I couldn't cast it on anyone else. I guess it was a hit or miss, either I waste 75 mana or have a chance to gain far more. Life Link would be nice. I would just cast that on Ska's target. I would have to warn Fiona about it though. Beacon was a met. I didn't relish being the center of attention, even if I had the best armor and was the most likely to survive. But if it meant keeping a fatal blow off an ally, I could accept that. Now, Shockwave was nice. I had been hoping for another ranged option. Stunning Gust was okay, but it only had a small chance to stun. Now I had a guaranteed stun and another way to funnel my weapon damage through a ranged attack. After looking over the skills, I checked on my stats to see how they changed. Paul Fuller Mantra Enchanter level 19. Strength, 13, plus 2, modifier x20. Endurance, 19 modifier x38. Agility, 15, plus 2, modifier x20. Perception, 17 modifier x20. Intelligence, 22 modifier x38. Wisdom, 14 modifier x20. Charisma, 11 modifier x20. Luck, 14 modifier x20. HP, 722, 794. Mana, 836. Mana Regen, M280. My mana and mana regeneration was getting to be quite ridiculous. I had enough mana now that I could multicast Area of Denial back to back, despite the doubled cost. And I was now recovering almost 5 mana a second. I drummed my fingers on the arm of the chair, thinking about what level 20 would bring. I also needed to think about what class to dual class into. Back when I had been dumped into the desert, I would have chosen a class that could make portals or teleports around wherever. Now with the fortress, that seemed pointless. Well, maybe not pointless but less of a concern. I decided to shelf those thoughts for later. I had a full level to think about that. For now, I decided to head back to Texas. A bit of rest and relaxation before we hit up the other dungeons would do us good. The others were focused on their level UPS and skills while I oriented the fortress and got us moving again. Chapter 100, Tides Are Turning. I relaxed on the beach as the ocean waves lapped at the sand a dozen feet away. The weather was perfect, a sunny cloudless day and no apparent monsters in sight. Ska and Martin were enjoying the water but keeping close to the shore. We knew the ocean had some nasty creatures in it. I had already gone for a swim but I preferred just lounging in the sun. When we returned to the Houston area, we parked the fortress near a beachside resort. The place had been deserted for quite some time but there had been plenty of signs of fighting in the area. This was our last day of rest. We had been here a week and unwinding had helped. Martin was starting to come back around, Ska was being less ornery and even I was given time to process all the fucked up shit that had happened in the last few weeks. I realized having a high intelligence didn't always help with making the most humane choice. It allowed me to come to a choice much quicker but not to think about the consequences of that action. I didn't regret killing the dwarves or the creatures in the abyss. But had I thought it through I would have done things differently, especially with the dwarves. Fuck those creepy bastards in the abyss, they got what they deserved. No, with the dwarves I realized I may have made another powerful enemy. I should have used explosives to level the entire cave system, if not before utilizing the nerve agent, then certainly afterward. Half-assing stuff like this is what had gotten me into trouble with the Black Dragons again. If I had gone through their loot then and there and disposed of that stupid ring, none of what happened to Armin or that desert outpost would have happened. I glanced toward the fortress, the smooth stone gleaming in the sun from the parking lot. The first thing we needed to do was offload the spoils. I didn't want that stuff being tracked back to us. Bella hissed next to me, throwing up sand as she dug deeper into the beach, creating a nest to lay in. She had recovered from her starvation, during the course of the week, and was back to her normal ornery self. I pulled out a piece of raw meat and tossed it into the air. She snatched it and chewed happily on it. As for Fiona, she floated around town, not really interested in floating into the water or sunning her non-existent skin. It was at times like this when she truly missed her body and wanted to be alone with her thoughts. I knew it depressed her but there wasn't anything we could do about her condition. Certainly not from a lack of trying. We always asked around in the bazaar when we were there. We got different answers but they all boiled down to no, you can't resurrect a person from the dead unless you wanted to make them undead. We would keep looking in any case. We set the fortress down in some superstore's abandoned parking lot. We crushed a few cars just for the heck of it before we extended the landing gear in a clear spot. I remembered this place from my visits to the marshal's office. It was a few miles away but much closer than we had been before. Most civilians in the area had evacuated to the green zone. An area that they had started constructing a wall. It was massive in proportion to even Biloxi and would cover a significant portion of the town when complete. The bazaar was also located in this district but was separated from the locals by a checkpoint and barricades. We didn't often go into the green zone, there was no need to since the bazaar was accessible without going there. The marshal's office was still located outside the green zone and would remain that way. In his words, "We aren't police, our job is not to keep the peace. Our job is to bring the really dangerous criminals to justice." The town had managed to stabilize a month after the system and elected a mayor and hired police to help keep crime down. It was an interesting system that they had in place, but I still avoided the town unless I had to go. Ska and Martin were heading to the bazaar to offload as much of the dwarven spoils as they could, while I went to talk with the marshal and let him know we returned. "Paul, you're back, just the person I wanted to speak with." "Oh, should I just turn around and leave?" "No, nothing bad, come. We can speak in my office." I followed the grizzled man into an office cluttered with papers and folders. He cleared off a chair for me, setting the lopsided stack on top of another before sitting behind his desk. "Paperwork never ends, even if the world does," he said with a sigh. "So, what's up?" "That can wait. How did your mission go?" "Gotta say you surprised a few people with your invention. Not as good as I would have liked. We managed to catch up with one of the men but not until after Martin's sister was killed along with his whole town." "I'm sorry to hear that," the man added sincerely. "Well, I won't keep you long. What are your thoughts on this Lord Victi, is he trustworthy?" Hard to say. I only met the man briefly. My guess is he has an agenda and he is quite frankly scarily high level." The marshal grunted, "I feared as much. We agreed to use his enchanted badges but some of the men feel they might be used to track our activities or spying on us. We were hoping you might be able to shed some light on them with your crafting skills." "Sorry, Marshal, I don't have any idea about what the enchantment does on the badges, other than what Lord Victi told me." "Why the sudden concern?" The man drummed his fingers on the desk for a bit before replying. "The mayor and some of his cohorts are worried about the state of the nation. They are fearful that we are going to become second-rate citizens in our own country." I had to choke back a retort about us doing the same thing to the Native Americans, but that was neither here nor now. "The mayor wants to form a unified coalition with surrounding cities and states to protect against this eventuality. He wanted me to go as a liaison to plead our case but I can't take months away from my post to try and convince people to join." "So you want me to do this instead?" "Not exactly. I think we both know where that would lead, Paul. Let's face it, you are not the most diplomatic person." I snorted, he wasn't wrong. "The mayor has a man that used to be a lawyer. He would like you to fly him around to local communities and farther." I rolled my eyes, "A lawyer? Why would I bother doing this?" "The mayor assumed you would do it out of civic pride. I convinced him to offer you something more tangible in its place. He is willing to offer you a mansion and all the land that went with it." "Yeah, not interested," I said flatly. "Yep, I told the mayor you would probably say that. So I offered him an alternative. Instead of flying some asshat lawyer around, how about you take one of the deputies?" I rubbed my chin in thought before answering him. "Are you asking me to do this or is the mayor?" "Well, I would appreciate it if you helped but it's not like I would force it on you. If worst comes to worst I can have my deputy go by horseback. Not to be a dick, Marshal, but I don't feel like being a courier. That being said, I do believe that cooperation will be necessary for survival. I can offer you an alternative for now. I will stick around and build you your own vehicle or vehicles. Nothing as slow as these Mana engine modified cars that are running around. And in the meantime, Martin and Ska can take your man to the first few locations. The mayor can foot the bill." "All right," the man said slowly, "but I will have to run it past the mayor first." I simply nodded. "We are parked in the old supermarket parking lot. Just ring the bell," I added with a smile. I had wondered how long it would take the new leaders to notice what off-worlders were up to. And I'm not talking about the ones and twos that came to trade or find a better life. No, there were massive kingdoms that were pouring enormous amounts of wealth into gaining a small foothold into our world. Then there were places like Biloxi that I suspected were run by the Enchanters Guild. Dangerous people to cross. Eventually, these rivalries would lead to war as it always inevitably did, but that would be years or decades away. The smart leaders would join forces and push out any others contesting their claims. It remained to be seen which side that was, Earth or the off-worlders. I wanted to stay away from politics. As far as I was concerned, all those greasy fucks needed to crawl back into their holes and leave the world alone. But that was a pipe dream. I knew that someone needed to govern the idiot masses. I just didn't care who did it. I was helping the marshal out because I liked the man. I didn't know the mayor, nor did I care to get to know him. My track record with post-apocalypse Earth authority figures was abysmal. Instead of dwelling on that, I turned my thought to what to build for the marshal. I certainly wasn't going to build them a fortress. I thought something more along the lines of the bus would be more practical and affordable. I entered the broken doors of the store and went in search of a pad of paper and a pen to write my ideas down. Like most stores, it had been thoroughly ransacked after the system came into being. I wasn't expecting to find anything of value, but I didn't expect the two men that came from either end of the aisle with knives. The lanky man in front of me spoke. "Give us all your credits and anything on you and you can go." I looked over my shoulder at the man behind me. He had a similar appearance to the man in front. I used identify on both as the one in front of me fidgeted nervously. Alan Tweaker level 8. Bart Tweaker level 7. My guess was these guys were stoned off their ass when the system came online, and either they picked the class because they thought it was funny or the system picked it for them. The names rang a bell and I looked at the one behind me again before it clicked. I remembered seeing their description on one of the wanted posters at the marshal's office. The Tarley brothers. "Hey, you sure you guys wanna do this? Give us all your shit or we will fuck you up, bro." "Alright. I was just gonna let you go because I had better things to do, but you forced my hand," I replied, my armor and weapon appearing. The men tried to run, probably the first sensible thing they had done, not that it helped them. I stuffed the two corpses in my ring. The reward was for dead or alive. 2 fewer assholes on the planet. I would give them to the marshal when he stopped by next.